today we're going to talk about different ways that someone, if you feel uncomfortable in those certain situations, what are some of the things that you can do to make yourself more comfortable and to be more successful at what the end goal is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are quite a lot of introverts, at least people that I know. It seems like I talk to, well, maybe it's one of those things like if somebody is vegan, they're going to tell you that they're vegan. And I can say that because I used to be vegan I was vegan and vegetarian for a decade. But,
Yeah.
there's that running joke. And I feel like introverts are kind of taking that on now. Like if you're an introvert, you're going to tell people that you're an introvert eventually, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It just came up the other day for me when I was going on a group hike. And
Okay.
so it was just naturally in conversation. Somebody said, "Are you an introvert or an extrovert?" So I'm like, people talk about this. This is a real
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and I liked the person who asked me if I was an introvert or extrovert. She actually said when I asked her, I said, "Well, what about you?" And she said, "Well, I'm an extroverted introvert. So you wouldn't really know that I'm an introvert,
Yeah.
but I really do need my time to recharge by myself. Like that's really important for me to have that time."
Yeah, and that's really what it is. I mean, there are a lot of different definitions. You can talk about what it means to be an introvert, what it means to be an extrovert. And, the idea really is that an introvert is someone who just has low extroversion. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, or if it, but the fact that it does, it's a matter of how we, the level of energy that's needed in order to do certain things. And for introverts, typically someone who is more introverted, excuse me, they tend to draw their energy from time that they have by themselves. They're more, they look inward for that energy, whereas someone who is more extroverted is someone who can actually feed off of the energy of other people around them. And so I think, to say someone is an extrovert or introvert, it's really, I think all of us are kind of somewhere in between. It's just a
Mhm.
matter of, what side do you lean to? So I'm curious, when she asked that question, what was your response?
Well, my response is that I am one of those ambiverts. So
See,
apparently,
again.
apparently I can't make a decision here. I'm just a little bit on both sides. So typically, I have taken several tests over the years that judge that, and repeatedly, it's always 49%. 51%. So it's like those like 49% extroverted,
Yeah.
51% introverted. So it's right on the line, which is kind of it I feel like I do have a lot of qualities, almost like what she said. I could totally resonate with what she said because she's like,
Yeah.
I'm an extroverted introvert. And I said, I can really relate to that. I feel like I'm an extroverted introvert a lot of the time as well. But
Yeah.
for me, I can turn it on and then I turn
Yeah.
it off, or I hit a wall and I have to turn it off.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, there's only so many. This is the perfect episode for it because we're talking about networking, like
Yeah.
networking, people forward, people centric, and
Mhm.
introverts. They come up to a lot of challenges with networking because it is so people centric.
Exactly. Yeah. So, uh-oh, technical issues. Um, so I guess from my vantage point, I hate to say, oh, same with me. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of people that I work with, that I know, would probably put me sort of more in the more extroverted category, because of what I do. I do a lot of public speaking. It's my job to go around and talk to people, and I do attend a lot of these networking events, where I have to, connect with a lot of different people. throughout the evening or day. And so I think from an outsider's viewpoint, you may look at me and say, okay, he's more of an extrovert, but I'm actually, if I look at it, and I've done similar tests, um, is I think I lean much more strongly on the introverted side. Just naturally, I do get energy from from time by myself. I have to
Mhm.
have that time to recharge. Um, and so I think naturally I'm more introverted. And when I find myself in certain situations, I do, like you said, it actually takes a lot of energy to overcome sort of that discomfort, that social awkwardness that we have when we're in these certain situations. And I think we all recognize that that level of discomfort, that's directly proportional to kind of the crowd that you're in. How well do you know the people in that room? We've all, kind of the opposite is if you're at a party with a group of friends, you're going to feel natural. You're naturally going to feel comfortable in that setting. But when you find yourself in a hotel conference room, or in some lounge, or happy hour bar where you don't know anyone there, then it's natural that you're just not going to have that level of comfort. And so, I think the times that we've interacted a lot in professional settings with this organization that we are involved in, ASHRAE, I can say that. um and that's actually, that's where we met, right?
Yeah.
At an ASHRAE meeting. And so I was thinking, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Michelle. So it was years ago in San Diego, and I wasn't at the time, but I'd come from the San Diego chapter. So I knew, a lot of the people in there. Yeah, I'd been to this meeting venue probably dozens of times for meetings throughout the year. So I was very comfortable in that setting. For you though, I think this was your first meeting.
Yeah, it was my first meeting.
Okay, so how did you feel in that situation?
Oh, yeah. So for me, it was I didn't know anyone, but it was
Okay.
my job to start to know people.
Yeah.
Like that, job responsibility as a salesperson, right? This was, and my territory was San Diego, or at least like Southern California, so a little bit above San Diego.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was, this is your job. You gotta go make the connections.
Yeah.
I knew what I signed up for, but even in that, I had the motivation because I wanted to do well in my role, but it
Yeah.
is kind of overwhelming. It's a little bit scary when you walk in, and especially when you're walking in to, as you know, in these organizations, ASHRAE, other organizations,
Yeah.
people are so well connected because they have been in the industry, involved in the
Yeah.
organization for a long time. A lot of these organizations are kind of a little bit smaller in terms of
Mhm.
leadership, and so you see people that continue to show up, so they have a really good relationship with others. And
Yeah.
so as this newcomer, you're coming in and you're like, hello. Who do I, and you have no idea who, I mean, there can be some overwhelming feelings just from the get-go because you're going to this new place. These
Yeah.
meetings are held in different areas that you've never been before, so it's just like it's just new, new, new. And then you get there and you're like, okay, what do you need from me? Here I am. Let me check in. Let me grab my name tag, whatever I need to do here, and then go and try to make inroads with
Yeah.
other people, try to connect and get to know people. But it can be hard from an outsider coming in because a lot of times people are so comfortable who have been involved previously that they're not just like, hey, you're the new person. What are you all about? So you have to very naturally kind of make your way in with people and learn about them and say hello and kind of learn where people like what their story is. So anyways, yeah,
Yeah.
the whole thing can be, like I said, overwhelming, but just intimidating, especially for someone who's may not be totally comfortable feeding off everyone else's energy, for
Yeah.
instance. Yeah.
Yeah, and as I'd mentioned, that was a situation that I felt comfortable in, but just because I had been there and I knew a lot of the people there. So it was, but for me, that because I was comfortable in that setting, then it's easy to actually seem like I'm an extroverted person, to be outgoing, to be, comfortable in that setting. Um, but in other situations, I've gone to other meetings where, you walk in the room and I don't know anyone in there. And it actually takes a lot of energy for me to kind of get myself up, um, to be comfortable, to engage with other people. And so I brought up that story, Michelle. Again, I'm putting you on the spot because I was talking to all these people, but kind of being more on the introverted side. I saw you were sitting at the table. And so I introduced myself and we had that introduction, that conversation. And now we're lifelong friends. So, so there are, that's actually one of the things that we'll probably hit on later is, what do you do in situations like that? And especially when, as someone who is more introverted, when you see other people who are possibly in that same situation, and how do you kind of ease that tension? So
Yeah.
it does. So I guess the takeaway is, I think, to categorize someone as an extrovert or introvert, I think most of us kind of fall somewhere in the middle, and
Mhm.
it's going to vary. Your level of interaction, your level of comfort is going to vary based on the particular situation that you're in. But it is work. That's why, work is, I don't know the origin of that word, but networking, we are working.
Mhm.
It'd be one thing entirely if it was strictly a social situation. If you're going to a party, and certainly you can be super awkward at parties as well. But I think we want to focus today's conversation on how do we overcome that awkwardness so that we can be effective in the networking part of our jobs on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely like when you had just said party versus work.
Yeah.
For me, my introversion comes out so much more when it's on my time, when it's like my social thing. If I'm going to a party, it's like, yeah, I don't have to say hello to any person here, unless it naturally happens.
Yeah.
We're grabbing a drink together and something funny happens, and it's like, okay, we can talk. That's very natural, but for me, part of the motivation, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, the motivation comes from, well, you have to do this.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, yeah, or I feel a sense of I want to do this because
Yeah.
I feel like it's really important for me, or it makes sense. It makes it's important for us to do this next step. Like we
Mhm.
understand it.
Yeah.
And I'm also a questioner in terms of Gretchen Rubin's, which we'll do a podcast episode about that, because
Okay.
she's got, I think, 4 different categories for people. And so anyways, in my mind, it's like it's got to make sense. And so for networking, I'm like, this does make sense. This is
Yeah.
helpful. I'm getting to learn the lay of the land. I'm connecting with people with similar interests, similar industry, the whole thing. When you go to a party and it's a purely social thing, either you know people there, or it's kind of the same thing where you're like, do we have anything to relate to at all? Like, we're not here for a
Yeah.
mission. We're not here because there's a shared purpose. People are just having fun.
Yeah, and that's really the whole, idea with these networking events is you are there, it's work, so you are there to work. And as, someone who is, we're at this level and we're high performers. We want to do the job, even though there are going to be times when we feel uncomfortable doing that job. We're still kind of rising to that challenge, so that we can be there to connect, to engage with customers, with clients, with potential people who can be our allies in the future. And so that's why, I mean, it is important. It's critical. And so we really need to get past that awkwardness so that we can do that. So we've kind of set the stage.
However,
Yes.
not all introverts are awkward, Devin.
I'm not saying that introverts are awkward, is that there's this awkwardness, or it's just another way of
Well,
saying, yeah, kind of
yes and no, though. I will
okay.
say, I'm going to debate you a little bit on this, because yes and no. Is there an awkwardness? There absolutely can be, in terms of,
Yes.
what do I do? How do I say it? How do I make the connection here? Do I just go over to someone? Like, what's the thing? But there's also the person who, like I said, those extroverted introverts, you would never know that they, like, for you, for instance, if I'm every single time I have met you at any sort of event or company thing, I have never thought, oh, Devin's an introvert, or Devin's awkward. You are like the definition in my eyes of this
Well,
connector, this extroverted person. And so there's not that socially awkward kind of moment. I think a lot of people, introverts especially, might be feeling a little bit like, oh my god, everyone always thinks that I'm awkward or I have social anxiety. I don't have any of those things. I just don't love talking to people I don't know. It like drains me.
yeah.
So I want to make that clarification, because it's not always, I'm like standing up for the introverts over here, because it's not always that they don't know how, or that they don't, um I guess, just know what to do. Because awkwardness in
Yeah.
there, you're like, okay, this doesn't come naturally. And yes, it doesn't come naturally,
Yeah.
but people can put off this image and this facade that they're perfectly at home introducing themselves to a room full of 100 people.
Yeah.
But when you ask them, and when you take a look at who they are, and how they get uh, nurtured and restored and
Yeah.
rejuvenated there, they would not say, oh, I feel great after saying hello to 50 different people and introducing myself and
Yeah.
making small talk. For me, that's like a hallmark of, nothing drains me faster than trying to make small talk with someone.
Okay. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So what are kind of our tips? What are our ideas in terms of how do we navigate through these situations if it does take a lot of energy?
Yes. So for me, I have a question for you,
Oh
because
boy.
this popped in my head as we were talking, and I was like, there's pros and cons to this. But what do you think about, let's say there is an event,
Yes.
and there you have to, you want to go, maybe you have to go, whatever it is,
Okay.
and should you take someone?
Um, it depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Um, and so when you say someone, are you talking about like a coworker, a or are you talking like a significant other, like a spouse or a
Yeah, what I was thinking for this, because we are focused on networking, for me, I'm
yes.
thinking coworker or industry
Okay.
friend, somebody who's familiar to us, where it's like, hey, do you want to come to this thing with me? And
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's fine, as long as, I mean, you don't want to take like a direct competitor with you, obviously, but someone who you feel is going to equally benefit from that situation, and someone that you can kind of lean on to maybe break that ice and get yourself into the mood of the room. Um, but I think the one thing you really want to avoid is because if you are uncomfortable, if you feel intimidated within that setting, you don't want to end up spending your entire evening or day with that one person. And I think there might be a tendency for when you're uncomfortable to say, oh, I know this person, I just hang out with this person the whole time. And then you've sort of lost the entire point of the networking event. That whole point is to meet new people and to meet as many people as possible. And so I think it's a good way to kind of ease through things. And maybe they know people and you can they can make introductions, or if you happen to know someone else, you can make introductions. So it's mutually beneficial. But you just want to be very careful that you don't use that as sort of a crutch to overcome, your discomfort within that situation.
Yeah, because then you're never really getting out of your
Exactly.
comfort zone because you have a
Yes,
built-in comfort zone.
exactly. So you're bringing your comfort zone with you.
Yeah.
So, but I think that there is some benefit, but you just, again, be set in your mind, be very intentional as to what the purpose is of your being at that event. So you said you have to be there. So you probably have to be there because you've got a goal in mind. Maybe you're in an event where you have to meet, there are specific people that you're trying to get in front of. Maybe it's an industry event focused on a certain vertical market. You're trying to get into that. So you want to talk to maybe the building owners, or you want to talk to the engineers who design those projects. And so you want to be very clear in your mind before you go as to what you want to try to do. If there are specific people you want to meet or how many people you want to meet, you want to understand your audience, know who's going to be there. If a lot of times these are at, conferences where you sort of already know who the main players are. So you can kind of understand who you want to get to. And then also, try to figure out who you already know, because they can help with introductions. So really it's having that mindset, being prepared and being able to understand what is your goal so that you can execute on that goal.
Okay, so you just dropped gold there. Uh so nonchalantly, like here's your whole roadmap for how to network appropriately. So I want to take a step back.
Okay.
And so the very
Fair.
first thing that you said, let's break these things down into
Sure.
their pieces. So let's dive in a little bit further.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Okay, go.
okay. So in terms of putting the plan together, is that what you're
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like you can say this so easily because you have spent an entire career doing this.
Well,
And so you're like, "Oh, I see how to have success here because you've practiced. You're a master in
what?
this."
All
But for
right. All
somebody,
right.
like, I mean, honestly, think
Yeah.
of the person who they have never gone to a large networking event or even a small networking event. I mean,
Yeah.
either one can be just as intimidating depending on the person, but keep in mind that person. Maybe they switched roles and now this is part of their job, or they're trying to grow in their career, and so maybe their mentor told them,
Yeah.
you know hashtag mentor mentee in our previous episode here. But yeah, maybe it's, I know that I'm going to do this, but I've never done it before. So
Okay.
starting there.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up. So it's first off is understand the purpose of the event, and you have to have the mindset. I think a lot of times people think, oh, we're going to go to a conference, we're going to be in meetings all day, and then there's this networking event at the end, and they sort of think of that as, oh, okay, now I can finally relax. It's a party, o- open bar. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, and there might be a tendency to think, okay, now I can, loosen the tie, I can relax. And to some degree, you do want to relax. You have to, you know, take it down a notch, but you always also have to remember that you're still working. The networking event is still work. And so you need to be able to conduct yourself in a manner where you're still maintaining that level of professionalism. So that is key. Again, We'll get to the alcohol in a
So
second.
repeat, level of professionalism.
Yes. So level of professionalism, and then be clear as to why you are there. Oftentimes these events happen in the evening, which, we've talked before about kind of scheduling our day, and evening is typically kind of your time. So you're giving up your time, your family time, to be at an event because you're working. And so you want to make sure that you make the most out of that networking opportunity. The reason why, these opportunities are so great is because throughout the course of maybe your work week or your work month, you may struggle to get in front of a handful of key stakeholders in whatever industry you're in. Here's an opportunity to be in the room with all of them at once. So you want to take advantage of that. You want to understand, okay, who's going to be there, and if you have to, bring a note. I've done this before. Bring a notepad, so you can write down things. You want to make sure that you identify who are the people that you really need to get in front of. Who would you like to get in front of? And there are going to be a lot of people there you don't know. So you've got to be able to be very agile in determining, who, as you meet people, because you're going to meet a lot of people, who are the people that are going to kind of move forward your agenda. And obviously, this is a social setting, so, and you want to be, social. So I don't mean to sound like, you're worthless to me, I don't want to talk to you. Don't do that. But at the same time, you have to recognize that this is your time, and you have to make the most of that time. So you want to maximize your level of engagement with the key stakeholders who you're really trying to get in front of. And so it's, that takes, as I'd mentioned before, if you're leaning more towards the introverted side, is that takes a lot of energy, right? To be able to have that discussion. You mentioned before, you kind of have to turn it on. You have to kind of, put forth what may not be natural to you. So again, I'm taking a bigger step back. Is the first thing is, when you approach those situations, is make sure that physically and mentally you're ready to go.
You
And
gotta psych yourself up.
yeah, you've got to psych yourself up, and you have to be rested. You can't go in there exhausted. I know that a lot of these events happen. It's like meetings all day and then the networking event at night. And for some people, if you're leaning towards the extroverted side, you actually get the energy, your energy, you feed off of that energy when you get to that networking event. For those who lean towards the introverted side, it actually drains your energy even more. So what I find is, whenever, if all day meetings, I actually have to go back to my room and just take 10 minutes, just, take a deep breath, relax, lay on a bed of nails or something,
Yep.
and just get myself ready so that when I go down to the event, I am, recharged and ready to go. So it's, having that intention that these are the people I need to meet, and then kind of going through and executing on that.
Yeah. So, like you said, from the very outset, we do have to be replenished. We have to have our cup full, or
Yes.
as full as we can get, because like you already mentioned, a lot of these networking events, we're entering them with already depleted as an introvert, because we've just spent the full day talking to people, or
Yeah.
being in this work environment that we don't thrive in sometimes, when we're constantly people facing,
Yeah.
and the work that is done in these, let's say, conferences or conventions. So we're coming into the networking portion of it, and we do want to be really intentional. So I would say that that starts with, even before you even leave for the convention, to kind of have this plan in place. If it's like multiple days here, if
Yeah.
it's something that, oh, it's just this thing I do after work, finding if you can take some time. I've even spent time in my car doing the thing that is, you're running from a meeting to another networking event after a full day of work. And so break it up in that drive. If you can break it up, like listen to that podcast that fills your cup, your favorite music, take 10-15 minutes, do like a guided meditation, something where you can where you can really level up your energy after feeling like you are depleted, because you want to go in and be able to execute on your intention. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you have the energy for it to stay the course with your commitments and your intention there. So I love what you said, which is basically have a plan.
Yeah, yeah. Have a plan. And one of the things that you just brought up is making sure that you are physically that you're ready, right? And you're taking care of yourself both physically and mentally. And one of the things, and again, we're going to go into another topic here, is taking care of your body, which means taking care of your stomach. One of the things you want, sometimes there's a tendency, and again, I'm using this kind of conference networking event kind of a scenario, but this could happen at any time. There's a tendency sometimes to get to an event and think, oh my gosh, I'm starving. And when you have that, when your mindset, when you're focused on what is the food or what can I eat, that's going to take away from your, your main purpose, which is to meet people. And so, I always think, if you can have a snack beforehand, if you're not solely focused on getting in that buffet line right away, then that's helpful. So you can take care of that, and that way your mind can shift away from the fact that you're really hungry. And when it comes to food, this is a whole other podcast, but I tend to avoid, anything that's very heavy. You don't want anything that's going to bog you down. You want, light things that are going to keep you, in the right framework. I employ something. This is a little trick I have. So it doesn't work in every situation. But are you ready? Are you ready?
I'm
Because I've got a
ready.
clever name. It's called small plate, small talk. Small plate, small talk. Do you know what this? Have I talked to you about this before?
I don't think so, but
Okay, so here, let me set the stage for this scenario. Okay, you're at a networking event, right? And they have a buffet. Okay, they have a
okay.
buffet, and then they've got tables. Maybe they're high top tables, maybe they're regular tables, and you're trying to meet as many people as you can, but you're in a room where you probably don't know a lot of people. Okay, they may or may not have name tags. That's another thing altogether. If you don't
Oh
know
boy.
who you're connecting with, you're in a room with, let's call it maybe 50-50, right? Salespeople or vendors, people trying to get clients, and then the actual customers. So the
Yes.
last thing you want to do is spend your entire evening talking with another vendor or a competitor or someone else. That's not, it could be great. You can have a great conversation, but that's not the point of this event. So what I do is, again, small plate, small talk, is whenever you approach a buffet line, there's usually, not always, but there's usually a big plate and then a small plate. And the small plate's usually for hors d'oeuvres or bread or
Mhm.
dessert. Okay. Always
All the
grab the
best
small
things.
plate. Yeah. Always grab the small plate. Because there's a tendency, if you get the big plate, is you're going to fill it up, right? You're going to fill it up. You have a full meal in front of you. You're going to go to a random table, sit down, and you cannot leave until you finish your plate.
Mhm.
um it's rude if you leave. You can't just get up and leave.
Right.
So I always small plate, get one thing. Maybe it's an appetizer, maybe it's like a shrimp or meatball or something, or maybe a few things, just small things. Okay, and then so you have your small plate. You can go to a table, you can go to a group of people and introduce yourself, and you can start talking to people, and very quickly, within 1 minute, okay, these are people, yeah, I need to talk to these people.
Mhm.
Or you think, um, with all due respect, I don't need to talk to these people. That maybe they're competitors, or there's someone that we were know. So it becomes very easy when you have a small plate to finish that one meatball and say, "Oh, it was great meeting you. I'm going to go check out what else they have." And then you leave. So it gives you that opportunity to meet as many people as possible without having to basically commit yourself to an entire meal with certain people.
Mhm.
It doesn't always work. But the other component of that is the small talk. And that is one thing that, again, you've got to overcome. If you feel uncomfortable in that situation, you've got to overcome that. And so I always like to have just general, kind of icebreakers, if you will. Um,
Yes.
there are usually things that you can pick up on. You can talk about the conference. There are things you can ask about. I've found that it's very helpful to sort of break that ice is if you can inject any sort of humor into things. For some people, it doesn't come naturally, and that's
Mhm.
okay. But it does really help when you're trying to connect with someone if you can inject some sort of humor. And one of the ones I hate. It almost sounds like it's a line, but I'll tell you anyway. One of the things I I always do is, let's say that there's a group of people at a table, and I'm going through my little small plate routine, right? I've got my small plate, and you can't just sit down. That'd be rude. So I always say, "Hey, do you mind if I join you?" Okay, and the
Very
reality is,
polite,
yeah.
very polite. Yes, of course,
So
Devin, join us.
yeah, of course, that's the only reasonable explanation, unless they say, "Oh, someone's already sitting there."
Right.
That's the only negative response. But generally speaking, they can only say yes. And so I always respond, "Well, it'd been super awkward if you said no." And so it makes people laugh. And then you sit down and then you can just launch into start introducing yourself and talking to people. The other thing is, so you've got kind of icebreakers. Have some of those in your head. The other thing is know how to introduce yourself. We've talked before, you and I, and maybe not on a podcast, but on your elevator speech.
Yes.
And I can, I've got some thoughts about elevator speeches. Some of them are, yeah.
That would
We'll
be a
talk later.
great that would be
Yeah,
a great
we'll talk
episode
later.
because there's a
Yes.
full art with an elevator pitch.
Yes. But to be able to, someone's going to ask you who are you? What do you do? To be able
Mhm.
to very concisely and just very easily and naturally say that is really important. So that's kind
Yeah,
of my
and
small talk, small plate
small talk, small
tip.
plate. Yes, I love it. You also, when you were talking, I was thinking the people who are at networking events are there because they want to network or they see some purpose in being there. And so just simply knowing that people desire to connect on some level
Yeah,
is kind of like a built-in comfort there where
sure.
we can take that and we can run with it. I really like what you said about setting the intention, and I want to go back to that for just a second because when we think we have to do something for work, that takes a lot of the joy and some of the direction out from the whole scenario.
Yeah,
So when we are setting up for the whole entire experience of networking, it's not just that we have to do it. So I think we do need to become really clear, even if it is part of your role and your boss is like, you need to go ahead and do this, or you have a
yeah,
business. And I have been in those situations with my business where it's like, okay, this would be really good for the business, but I have made that determination at the outset that this would be really good. And so even if I feel like I have to do something, there is some level of internal motivation that I'm very clear about from approaching the whole scenario, really, because I am saying, this is why I need to do this. This is why I should do this, whatever it is. So sometimes we do need that boost. And
yeah,
then when we're approaching the whole networking event, we're entering that room. I think it's really important to remember that these people have come together for a purpose. And so say hello, be open. That's one of my biggest life tips. If you want to meet people, and I've even told other like women or other men who are looking for love, they'll be like, well, it'll come up very naturally. And I'm like, just be open. Like
yeah,
the beauty of connecting with people in this very organic way, a lot of times just goes back to, does this person look like they want to talk or that they'd be open to talk? When I have a bad day or am not in that right mindset and I'm looking down, I'm scrolling my phone, my brow is kind of furrowed and everything.
furrowed.
I'm not approachable in that situation, but when I go out in the world and I acknowledge other human beings
Yeah,
and and just look like I am I'm a nice human being. I'm able to say hello, and that's not going to ruin my day if someone says hello. And I cannot tell you how many conversations have started from just me setting the intention to be open to connecting with other humans.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier when we were talking about when we first met in San Diego, and to be able to just, when you see someone, to just go up and say hello. It is so simple. And, sometimes you think worst case scenario, but there is nothing bad and very, very few bad things can happen to that. But,
Yeah.
so it is important to just have that mindset, have that attitude that, yes, we're going to, just, it becomes more natural the more and more you do it. The other thing that you kind of touched on, and I wanted to spend a little more time on, is when you are engaged with someone, just, again, it comes down to just basic courtesy, but
Mhm.
is to be engaged with that one person. When you're talking to that one person, they're the only person in the room, and there's nothing more, I don't want to say frustrating, but disappointing, that when you're talking to someone and you can see their eyes are wandering looking at who else they can talk to at a party or something, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden they say, oh, I'm sorry, I need to talk to that person. And so don't do that. You want to be engaged, you want to be present,
Mhm.
maintain that eye contact, be cognizant of what your body language is, to show that you are there, you're invested, and you want to make that connection. And then the other thing is, once you've made that connection, you can have a great conversation with someone, but if you don't follow up, then you're going to miss out. So, we're going back to kind of the business purpose of this whole scenario is, have business cards. Do people use business cards? Do you use business cards?
I still use business
Okay.
cards. There's a lot of
So
QR codes out there lately.
yes. So I've kind of half. I've got business cards, but then I also have a electronic card, if you will, that
Mhm.
you tap on a phone and it puts their information into your phone. That's all good and fine. That will establish a means for someone to connect with you, but you want to connect with them. And so, the first thing that I like to do when I get back from an event, probably not that evening because it's draining. So the next morning is, break out that notepad that I brought and start following up with those people, because that person may have met 25 people that evening, but maybe 3 of them reached out to them afterwards. And I can't tell you the number of people I've met at events who, we're not even in the same industry anymore, but we're still connected on LinkedIn, we're connected on other social media platforms, and we're still friends because we made that connection afterwards. So
Absolutely. Yeah, and I actually did write down the taking notes portion when you were like when we first were talking about this, because that is something that I think a lot of people who may be very new to networking, they don't know to do
yes.
that. And so I remember I did not take I had like a notepad that was just in my purse and could, but when you're, let's say, at a happy hour,
Yeah.
you're not taking your notepad with you. So you kind of have to factor that in, like, okay, let me run over and take this note or something. And for what our role, my role was, and you're very much still involved, but in terms of like winning projects
Yeah.
or contracts or whatever it may be, where it's very specific and you're maybe new to the landscape of what that looks like, you may hear these project names or big things that you're like, I need to remember this. Who's this
Yes.
guy's name? What firm are they with? So
Yeah.
on a very logistical level, for me, with my goldfish brain, if I don't write it down, it's not being remembered.
Yeah.
And I might know that we talked about it or I met some guy, but if I don't write down his name, I'm not really magically just going to remember exactly who it was and
Yeah.
how to get a hold of them next time or what firm. So for me, even just coming back to my phone, sending myself an email.
Yes.
That was my go-to when I would be at networking events. I would pull up an email to myself and I would just have a running list of notes and things I needed to follow up on. Because after I started networking and going to back to the same organization meetings and such, I would see people that I came to know and be connected to, and they would
Yeah.
have a question for me. And for me to be a good person in my work life, I wanted to be able to follow up for them and get back to
Sure.
them. And when you're in this kind of relaxed environment of maybe like a happy hour, or we even did really fun things like a Christmas party and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so you do have to find a way that you are able to actually make the meeting work for you, like this networking event work for you. Because back to
Yeah.
what you said, this is not just a social engagement, for there is a purpose to this.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that we can be successful in following through on what the whole purpose is, which is to gain more business, meet more people, find some direction, in many ways kind of get like a bit of the lay of the land when it comes to something that's brand new to you.
Yeah. And so, I mentioned before writing stuff on a notepad, and you said, emailing yourself. You do want to be a little careful because you don't want to be that person at an
It's on
event
their
who's
phone.
always on their phone. So you want to be careful. So another thing that you can do is, still using your phone, but do quick voice notes to yourself. So you can record quick voice notes, little different apps that can help you do that. So just different ways to capture that. And then, and my former employee is going to love hearing this. Capture it in your CRM, whether you're using Salesforce or anything else. I know is plug for Salesforce, but it is so powerful to be able to put all of that information. And I actually go and I put in like everything that that we discuss, because it may not be relevant that engineer you talk to, there's an engineer who was talking about just small talk again, talking about, oh yeah, my husband and I were planning a trip to Japan, you
Mhm.
know and I thought, oh, that's interesting, we were talking about Japan. But I put that in my notes, so I know next time I see her I can say, hey, how was Japan, you know
Yeah.
and it means a lot because it's gonna, you know, I hope they're not listening to this. But when you have notes, or if you ask about family, or if you ask about, things, if someone is really talking, if they're very passionate about soccer
Mhm.
or something, you have that mental note, you can keep a lot of that in your head. But as you start meeting more and more people, it's impossible to keep all of that in track. So take advantage of what tools are available to you. If your organization uses a CRM like Salesforce or anything like that, then there's a lot of power in being able to capture that, so that when you prepare for the next event, you'll at least know you'll have that stuff in there.
Yeah,
Like,
I completely agree with what you say here, and especially when just in terms of living our life and making valuable connections with people. I mean, we think about, oh, okay, let me take a note about what we talked about so I can follow up and weave that in. And it seems very like business motivated, but
yeah,
actually, when we connect with people and you connect with so many people as your career goes on, you do want to come back to that really interesting thing. You do want to make someone feel like you care about them because you genuinely do. That thing that you talked
yeah,
about at this event, last November was actually really cool, and you connected, and you had something in common. And so I kind of equate it to, if we want to read a book, we
yeah,
we highlight things in the book, we dog ear pages, we come back to it, maybe we read a summary or the Cliff Notes version 2 years later when we want to get, this idea back in our heads. We don't expect ourselves to read the book once and to just put it away on a shelf, and
yeah,
that we've just retained all of the information. And so as a human being, in terms of my success with other people and in my personal life, a lot of times it's some of the logistics of, I have a brain, and that brain can only hold and file so much. And so for me to make the most of it, I do need to have some of these technical, logistical things in place so that
Yeah.
I get to really fully come back to that. I mean, I've had people that they have the cutest, fluffiest dog, and I am like such a dog person, and I just want to talk about their dog again, and I
Yeah.
want to remember their dog's name. I'm like, hey, how's
Yes.
Cooper doing? How is Cooper? What is he up to lately?
Yeah.
And people are like, they're so excited about that. I know if somebody remembers my dog's name, and I think one of the things early on, we would come back and you check in with me. How's the dog? How are you doing?
Yeah.
How's this thing that you're pursuing? And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that we're kind of like following this storyline of my life when you've connected with all of these people in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think the last thing that I am thinking here for this episode is we know that there's this purpose of being a networking event,
Yes.
but with that, we also the networking event is made up of probably a whole lot of introverts as well.
Yeah.
And so everyone should keep that in mind that when you go first, when you say, hello, my name is Michelle, I work at this company, do this thing, whatever it is, you're opening the door and making things easier for people. So come in with good energy and good intention and just that real desire to meet other human beings. Because as we know, connection is so important. And
Yeah.
just because this isn't the thing that fills your cup in terms of talking to people or making small talk or doing this thing that you feel like you have to do, it's still an important part of not only your work life, but the whole human experience. And like you and I know how we kind of started this episode, like we met at a networking event, and it
Yep.
has been one of the most fulfilling relationships for both of us, because it's like we found someone who we could relate. We're like, oh my gosh, we have had so many fun experiences.
Yep.
We've had fun at networking events. Like I remember we talk about like don't take a friend, but then when you do start to make these connections, you have built-in friends. So it's like we
Yeah.
go, I would share my notes with you, you would share your notes with me, like we would be kind of the eyes and ears to make the most of it. And I just think that's like a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said there, because I may have, I talked earlier about how you have to have a purpose. And it seemed like this was very much just a business transaction, but it is so much more than that. It is that opportunity to build those meaningful connections that are going to lead you to success down the road, because we all want to work with people that we know and that we can relate to, and we have that we've kind of connected with on a more personal level. And so that's that great opportunity. So there is one thing I sort of tease, so I feel bad if I don't get back to it, and that
Yes.
is I mentioned alcohol.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh, yes.
okay, so hold on. I'll be very quick about this. There's often a tendency when people feel uncomfortable, that maybe, to have a drink, a glass of wine, it's going to take the edge off. It'll make them feel more at ease. And for many people that does work. It helps kind of calm your senses. But I want to just be very cautious about that, because again, you are there, going back to my other point, you're there to work, so you have to be very present, you have to be mindful, you have to be as sharp as possible.
Mhm.
Okay, you want to have fun. You don't want to be that boring person in the corner. You want to have fun, but you have to be careful, because you want, maybe a glass of wine is fine. I tend to maybe get one drink and just nurse it the entire night, because what you don't want is, you don't want to overindulge. You don't want to do something or say something that's going to be inappropriate and it's going to be remembered. You only have that one chance to make that first impression.
Mhm.
And I can think of countless of people who I've met in social situations who have overindulged, and that's what they're remembered for.
Yeah.
And there was somebody I met gosh, almost 10 years ago. And for years, a group of us would think, oh, there's so and so. Oh boy, got to be careful with him. And it was not until last year I met him in a different setting. And I had this mindset of who he was. He was that, that kind of loud, obnoxious person at that one event. And he's really smart. He's actually a really, really, we had we spent a couple of hours just talking about work and things. And so it's really, you want to be very careful. We talked earlier about maintaining his level of professionalism, and that level of professionalism can often get blurred when people overindulge. So I would strongly caution against taking the attitude that networking event, open bar, it's a party. It's not a party. You're there to work, and you need to be respectful, and you need to be mindful of that. So if you need a glass of wine just to kind of ease yourself, then that's okay. You want to be very, very careful.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I would say also have a bit of a rule for yourself and
Yes.
determine that. So a lot of this comes back to just being prepared, but in my career thus far, typically it was you're representing a company, so it's not only just yourself, but it's also this company. And I've been working since I was 15, and so it was a lot of the no matter where you are, if you enter a building, even if you're outside of the building, you have no idea who you're running into, what you're doing, who
Yes.
the decision maker is. And that was always drilled into my head from a very young age because I was part of a talent agency. And so you don't know who the decision makers are. And so it's like you show your best self and you're always respectful and you always operate with integrity, because it's not just you who's kind of on the line with this. And so for me, I can resonate with that exactly and especially as a woman in
Sure.
social situations. I had a pretty strong rule for myself that if I was going to have any alcoholic beverage, it was one and one only.
Yeah.
And it was pretty soon after I got there, after I said hello to people, and that was it. And so a you have to have a commitment in mind, because in these social settings, especially when it's this fun atmosphere.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been to some really fun events and people are like, "Oh my gosh," and maybe they're not taking it as seriously as you because their role is different. Maybe they're being treated because they are the customer and you're the
Yeah.
person who's looking to meet the customers. And so there's different levels there, but we need to really be prepared and not give in, because in many of the situations I've been in, people, they want you to partake because they're partaking.
Yeah.
They want you to
And
drink because they're having fun and they're ordering shots for everybody because they're not paying for them and you're not paying for them either. So we just need to be really cognizant of that, because like you said, networking is working.
yeah.
And especially for an introvert or somebody who may feel like they do need this to get a little bit more comfortable, we don't want to get into a bad situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, you mentioned the one drink rule. I do the same thing. I'll have one drink and hold it the whole time, or I switch up to something, like a club soda or something that, you switch off, halfway through the night or whatever. And then, you're able to still participate in the event as other people, continue. But you're still on your A game, you're still sharp, and you're still, doing the task at hand. So, all right. I just want to
Absolutely.
make sure we cover that
You can have a
topic.
you can have a Shirley Temple, and people are like, "Oh, that's like a vodka and something," and you're like, "Uh-huh, sure." Or
Yeah.
you can, have your club soda with a lime on the side, and you're
Yeah.
golden. People don't really question it, and that's really for kind of like your comfort, because if you want to make it known, I don't drink. If you're a person who doesn't even want one, that should
Yeah.
also be totally
Yeah.
socially acceptable,
It
right?
should
So
be.
it's your level of comfort.
Yeah. All right. So
All
we've
right.
been, we've been going on for quite some time. I think we've covered a lot of great topics, and hopefully these tips have been useful if you find yourself in these socially awkward situations. To kind of get yourself through that. And I think that the more you do it, the more you get into it, the more comfortable you'll feel, and you'll be able to achieve the goals that you're looking for.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Thank
all
you
right.
for listening. And if you have made it thus far, I think that you might like our podcast. So I'm going to plug if you want to like or share our podcast. We